The stagecoach rattled to a halt in the dusty streets of Denver, Colorado Territory, and Winifred Adams stepped down with nothing but the clothes on her back and a worn leather Bible clutched against her chest like it contained all the answers to questions she had not yet learned to ask. The year was 1869, and the mountain town sprawled before her like a promise half-kept, buildings of raw timber standing defiant against the towering peaks that surrounded them on all sides. The air smelled of pine and smoke, of horses and sawdust, of possibility tinged with desperation. Winifred stood on unsteady legs, her traveling dress stained with trail dust, her auburn hair escaping its pins after 3 weeks of brutal travel from Philadelphia. She was 22 years old and utterly alone in the world. "You getting off or not, miss?" The driver's voice cut through her reverie, impatient and rough. "Yes, I am off," she said, stepping aside as he tossed down the remaining luggage for the other passengers. There was nothing for her. Everything she had owned burned in the fire that took her parents and younger brother 6 months ago. Everything except the Bible her grandmother had given her before passing, the leather cover soft with age and use, the pages filled with careful notes in faded ink. The other passengers dispersed quickly, met by waiting families or heading toward the hotels that lined the main street. Winifred stood alone, watching them go, feeling the weight of her solitude settle around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had come west because there was nothing left for her in the east, because her aunt had written of teaching positions available in the mining camps, because staying in that empty house with its ghosts and memories would have killed her as surely as the flames had killed her family. "You look lost." The voice came from behind her, deep and measured, and she turned to find a man watching her from the shade of the general store's overhang. He was tall, powerfully built beneath buckskin clothing that had seen hard use, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and a beard that could not quite hide the strong lines of his face. His eyes were gray like storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I am not lost," she said, lifting her chin. "I am exactly where I intended to be. And where is that?" He stepped forward into the sunlight, and she saw he moved with the easy grace of someone utterly comfortable in their own skin. There was a rifle slung across his back and a knife at his belt, but his hands hung loose at his sides, unthreatening. "Denver, I have come to find work as a teacher." Something flickered in those gray eyes, something that might have been sympathy. "Schools are mostly closed for summer. Won't open again until September, and even then, positions are scarce. Most families teach their own or don't bother at all." The words hit her like physical blows, but she refused to let her face show the panic rising in her chest. "Then I shall find other work until then. What can you do?" It was a fair question, asked without judgment, but it forced her to confront truths she had been avoiding since leaving Philadelphia. She could read Latin and Greek, could recite poetry, could play the piano and paint watercolors. She could do nothing useful, nothing that would keep her fed and housed in this rough mountain town. "I can learn," she said finally, meeting his gaze directly. "I am not afraid of hard work." He studied her for a long moment, and she studied him in return. He was perhaps 30 years old, his face weathered by sun and wind, his hands scarred and calloused. There was something wild about him, something untamed, as if he belonged more to the mountains than to civilization. But his eyes held intelligence and, she thought, kindness. "My name is Xavier Thorne," he said at last. "I have a cabin up in the high country about 15 miles from here. I come down once a month for supplies. I have been looking for someone to help with the domestic side of things. Cooking, mending, keeping things in order. The work is hard, the location is isolated, but I pay fair and I give my word you would be safe under my roof." Winifred's first instinct was to refuse. A young woman, alone with a stranger in an isolated cabin, it was scandalous, it was dangerous, it was everything she had been raised to avoid. But the sun was sinking toward the mountains, and she had perhaps $3 in her pocket and no other prospects presenting themselves. "I have no references to give you," she said carefully. "No proof of my character except my word. And I am a mountain man who lives alone and comes to town once a month," Xavier replied. "I have no references either. But I can tell you this, I have never raised my hand to a woman and I never will. You would have your own room with a lock on the door. The arrangement would be purely business. If it does not suit, I will bring you back to town when I come for supplies next month. No questions asked." She looked down at the Bible in her hands, at the worn leather cover that had absorbed decades of prayers and hopes and fears. What would her grandmother have counseled? Trust in the Lord, certainly, but also use the wits He gave you. She looked up at Xavier Thorne, at his steady gaze and weathered face, and made a decision that would change everything. "When do we leave?" "First light tomorrow. I have a room at the boarding house. Mrs. Kelly runs a respectable establishment. I will pay for a room for you tonight, and we can head out in the morning." They walked together through the dusty streets as the evening shadows lengthened. Denver was a town caught between two worlds, rough mining camps and respectable civilization, with saloons and brothels standing alongside churches and schools. Xavier led her to a neat clapboard house at the edge of town where Mrs. Kelly, a stout Irish woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile, welcomed Winifred with obvious relief. "Finally, another respectable woman in this town," she said, showing Winifred to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Too many girls coming west thinking to find husbands and finding trouble instead. You are wise to take honest work with Mr. Thorne. He is a good man, for all he prefers the mountains to civilization." That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Winifred opened her Bible and read by candlelight. The familiar words brought comfort, as they always did, but they also raised questions. Was she being foolish, reckless, or was this Providence placing her exactly where she needed to be? She fell asleep with the Bible open on her chest and dreamed of mountains. Xavier was waiting in the pre-dawn darkness, a pack horse loaded with supplies and a gentle mare saddled for Winifred. She came down the stairs of the boarding house with her worn Bible tucked safely in the pocket of her dress, everything she owned in the world. "You travel light," Xavier observed, helping her into the saddle. "I have learned that possessions can be taken from you in an instant," she said. "But faith, that is something that remains." He looked at her Bible, just visible in her pocket. "That is all you brought with you, just that book." "It is all I have," she admitted. "The fire took everything else." Xavier swung up onto his own horse, a big roan gelding that seemed as wild and untamed as its rider. "That worn Bible," he said, his voice thoughtful. "That is all we will ever need. Everything else is just trappings." The words surprised her, coming from a man who looked like he had never seen the inside of a church. But before she could respond, he urged his horse forward, and they left Denver behind as the sun broke over the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. The trail climbed steadily upward, following a creek that tumbled down from the high country. Xavier rode ahead, occasionally glancing back to check on Winifred, but mostly letting her find her own pace. The mare was sure-footed and gentle, and after the first hour, Winifred relaxed into the rhythm of the ride. The country around them was breathtaking. Pine forests gave way to groves of aspen, their leaves shimmering silver in the morning light. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in riots of color, purple lupine and Indian paintbrush and flowers she had no names for. The air grew thinner and cooler as they climbed, so clean and pure it almost hurt to breathe. They stopped at midday beside a mountain stream where the water ran so clear Winifred could count the pebbles on the bottom. Xavier produced hardtack and dried meat from his saddlebags, simple fare but welcome after the morning's ride. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked, watching as he watered the horses. 7 years. I came west after the war, spent some time as a scout for the army, but I had seen enough of fighting and dying. The mountains offered peace. You were a soldier, Union cavalry, saw action from Bull Run to Appomattox. His face went distant for a moment, lost in memories that clearly brought no pleasure. But that was another life. Up here, the only battles are against weather and wolves, and those I can manage. You never get lonely. The question came out before she could stop it, too personal, too presumptuous. But Xavier did not seem offended. He looked out at the mountains rising around them, peak after peak stretching to the horizon. "Loneliness is different from being alone," he said finally. "I have been lonely in crowds of people. Up here, I have the wind and the trees and the seasons. It has been enough." Has been, not is. The distinction was subtle but telling. Winifred filed it away, a small piece of the puzzle that was Xavier Thorne. They rode on through the afternoon, climbing higher into country that seemed to exist outside of time. Eagles soared overhead, and once Xavier pointed out a herd of elk grazing in a high meadow, their antlers velvet soft in the summer sun. The world Winifred had known, of city streets and society parlors and carefully prescribed behavior, seemed impossibly far away. The sun was sinking toward the western peaks when Xavier finally reined in his horse. "There," he said, pointing ahead. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, built of hewn logs chinked with clay. It was larger than Winifred had expected, with a covered porch along the front and a stone chimney rising from one end. Behind it, she could see a small barn and a corral where several horses grazed. A creek ran nearby, its music a constant murmur beneath the sighing of the wind in the trees. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. Xavier swung down from his horse, then came to help her dismount. His hands were gentle as he lifted her down, strong and sure. And for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the individual whiskers in his beard, the small scar above his left eyebrow. "Let me show you inside," he said, stepping back and breaking the spell. The interior of the cabin was dim and cool after the brightness outside. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs Xavier had clearly made himself, shelves lined with books that surprised her. A doorway led to a back room that Xavier indicated was his, and a ladder led up to a loft space. "That would be your room," he said, gesturing to the loft. "There is a good mattress up there, blankets, a trunk for your things. Such as they are," he added with a faint smile. Winifred climbed the ladder and found the space clean and inviting, with a small window that looked out over the clearing toward the mountains beyond. The mattress was indeed good, stuffed with what smelled like fresh straw and pine needles. A quilt covered it, the stitching fine and careful. "Did you make this?" she called down, "my mother. It is the only thing I have from her." The fact that he would give it to her, a stranger, told Winifred more about Xavier Thorne than a dozen conversations could have. She climbed back down carefully. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this. I will do my best to earn my keep." "I am sure you will. For now, you must be exhausted. There is a pump outside for water. I will see to the horses and get a fire going, then fix us some supper. Tomorrow you can take over the domestic duties, but tonight, consider yourself a guest." He was true to his word. While Winifred washed the trail dust from her face and hands at the pump, Xavier tended the horses with the practiced ease of long habit. Then he got a fire going in the hearth and proceeded to cook a meal that was simple but surprisingly good: venison steaks and beans and biscuits that were only slightly burned. They ate at the rough table, and Winifred found herself studying her new employer in the firelight. He ate with neat efficiency, his manners better than she had expected, and when he caught her watching, he raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "I am trying to figure you out," she admitted. "You live like a hermit in these mountains, but you have books on your shelves. You dress in buckskin, but you speak like an educated man. You say you came here for peace, but you carry weapons like a man expecting trouble. That is called being prepared, not expecting trouble. As for the rest, I never said I was not educated. My father was a professor before the war. I grew up with books and learning. But I learned quick enough that education does not stop bullets or keep you warm in winter. The mountains taught me what the books could not." "What did they teach you?" He considered the question, staring into the fire. "That most of what we think we need is just noise. That a man can live on very little and be content. That silence is not something to be feared but embraced." "And is that in your Bible?" she asked, thinking of his words from that morning. "I do not have a Bible. But I figure the wisdom is the same, whether you find it in Scripture or in the way water flows downhill, always finding its way home." Later, as she climbed to her loft and prepared for sleep, Winifred thought about what he had said. She opened her Bible out of long habit, but found her mind wandering from the words on the page to the man downstairs, to the puzzle he presented, to the unexpected gentleness in his strong hands. She fell asleep, listening to the sound of the creek and the wind in the pines, feeling safer than she had in months. The days settled into a rhythm that was both strange and comfortable. Winifred woke each morning to find Xavier already up, tending to the horses or hunting or working on one of the dozen projects that kept a mountain homestead running. She took over the cooking and cleaning, tasks she had never done in her privileged Philadelphia life, but learned quickly through necessity and determination. Xavier proved to be a patient teacher. He showed her how to make proper biscuits, how to cook over an open fire, how to preserve meat and vegetables for the winter ahead. He taught her to recognize the edible plants that grew wild around the cabin, the mushrooms that were safe and the berries that were poisonous. He treated her not as a servant but as a partner, someone whose intelligence and capability he respected. In the evenings, after supper was done and the dishes washed, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked, Xavier telling her about the land and its ways, Winifred sharing carefully edited stories from her past. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that exists between people who are becoming friends. One evening, perhaps 2 weeks after her arrival, Xavier asked about her Bible. "You read it every night," he observed, "but I never see you going to church or praying out loud. What is it you are looking for in those pages?" Winifred held the worn book in her lap, her fingers tracing the familiar leather. "Comfort, mostly. My grandmother wrote notes in the margins. Reading them makes me feel less alone." "May I see?" She hesitated, then handed it over. Xavier took it carefully, as if aware of its value to her. He opened it to a random page and saw the spidery handwriting that filled the margins, observations and prayers and small daily notes. "The bread turned out well today," he read aloud. "Thank the Lord for small mercies in a hard winter." This is dated 1832. "Your grandmother lived through hard times. She lived through everything. Lost her husband and 2 children to fever, survived alone for years before my father grew up and took her in. She always said faith was not about having answers, but about having hope." Xavier handed the Bible back with the same careful respect. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was the wisest person I ever knew. When the fire happened, when I lost everyone, this Bible was the only thing that kept me sane. Reading her words, knowing she survived worse and found reasons to be grateful, it gave me something to hold on to. And now, you still need to hold on to it. She looked at him in the fading light, at this man who was still so much a mystery to her. I think we always need something to hold on to. Do you not have anything from your past that matters to you? Just that quilt you sleep under. And memories, but those are harder to hold on to. Tell me one. A good memory. He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then, my mother had a garden behind our house. She grew roses, dozens of them in every color. On summer evenings, my father would come home from the university and she would cut the most perfect rose of the day and give it to him. Every evening, for all the years I can remember. He would put it in a vase on his desk while he worked. It was their ritual. That is beautiful. It was. Until the war came and my father went off to fight even though he was too old, too scholarly for soldiering. He died at Gettysburg. When I came home after the war, my mother was already gone too. Grief, the neighbors said, but I think it was a broken heart. The roses had taken over the garden, growing wild with no one to tend them. I am sorry. It was a long time ago, but you asked what I hold on to. I guess I hold on to that image, my father and mother and their roses. It reminds me that beauty exists, even when everything else is chaos. They sat in silence after that, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Winifred felt something shifting between them, some wall coming down brick by careful brick. Xavier was not the rough mountain man he presented to the world. He was educated, thoughtful, carrying his own griefs and losses. Not so different from her after all. Summer deepened into late July, and the work of the homestead continued. Xavier taught Winifred to shoot, first with his pistol and then with the rifle, insisting she needed to know how to defend herself if he was away hunting. She proved to be a quick study, her hands steady and her eye good. "You are a natural," he said one afternoon as she hit the target he had set up for the third time in a row. "Most people flinch when they pull the trigger. You stay calm." "I had good teachers," she replied, then realized what she had said. Teachers, plural, including him. When had Xavier become more than just her employer? August came with thunderstorms that rolled over the mountains like artillery, shaking the cabin with their fury. During one particularly violent storm, a bolt of lightning struck a tree near the clearing, splitting it with a crack like the end of the world. Winifred was down from the loft and across the cabin before she knew what she was doing, seeking shelter in the only safety that presented itself. Xavier caught her as she stumbled into him, his arms coming around her automatically. "It is all right," he said, his voice steady above the roar of the storm. "Just lightning. We are safe here." But she could not stop shaking, could not stop remembering another night, another fire, the smell of smoke and the screams she had not been able to answer. Xavier seemed to understand without explanation. He led her to the chair by the fireplace and sat down, pulling her into his lap like a frightened child. "Tell me about them," he said quietly. "About your family." And so she did. She told him about her father, a banker who loved music, who would play the piano every evening before dinner. About her mother, who hosted salons for intellectuals and artists, who believed women should be educated and independent. About her brother Thomas, only 15, who wanted to be an architect and drew elaborate buildings in the margins of his schoolbooks. "The fire started in the kitchen," she said, her voice barely a whisper against Xavier's chest. "I was staying with friends that night, some party I thought was so important. By the time someone came to get me, by the time I got home, the entire house was engulfed." The firemen would not let me go inside. I stood in the street and watched everything burn. Xavier's arms tightened around her, solid and warm and safe. You could not have saved them. I know that. I know it in my mind. But my heart keeps asking, what if I had been there? What if I had smelled the smoke sooner? What if? What if is a question that has no answer. You can drive yourself mad asking it. Trust me, I know. She pulled back enough to look at his face in the firelight. Your parents and my brother, and friends from before the war who did not come back. Every soldier knows that feeling. Why them and not me? What if I had been faster, smarter, better? You can carry that guilt until it crushes you, or you can choose to believe that you survived for a reason. Have you found your reason? I thought I had, living up here in peace. But lately, I have been wondering if maybe there is more. If maybe I was supposed to be in Denver that particular day, when a certain woman stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but a worn Bible. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Winifred felt her breath catch, felt something in her chest unfold like a flower toward the sun. Xavier's gray eyes searched hers, asking a question he had not yet put into words. Xavier, she whispered, and his name on her lips seemed to break whatever dam had been holding them both back. He kissed her gently at first, tentative, giving her every chance to pull away. But Winifred had no intention of pulling away. She kissed him back with months of loneliness and grief and hope all tangled together, and his gentleness gave way to something deeper, more urgent. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I did not bring you here for this. I want you to know that. I brought you here to help with the homestead, and I have tried so hard to be honorable, to keep my distance. But Winifred, I am falling in love with you, and I do not know how to stop it. Then do not stop it, she said simply, because I am falling in love with you too. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, wrapped in Xavier's arms, Winifred felt only peace. They stayed like that for hours, talking softly of hopes and dreams and the future that suddenly seemed possible where before there had been only survival. Marry me, Xavier said as the storm finally began to clear. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 2 months. But I have never been more sure of anything. Marry me, and we will build a life here together. We will have children and grow old watching these mountains. We will make our own rituals, our own beautiful things to hold on to. Yes, Winifred said, laughing through sudden tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They rode down to Denver the next week, leaving at dawn and pushing hard to make the trip in a single day. The town was bustling with summer activity, and they went straight to the small church on the edge of town, where a young minister named Reverend Peters agreed to marry them after only a brief conversation. You are sure about this? He asked Winifred privately, while Xavier waited outside. I know Mr. Thorne by reputation. He is a good man, but the life he leads is hard and isolated. You would be giving up any chance of society, of the comforts most women expect. Reverend, I lost everything comfortable and expected 6 months ago. What Mr. Thorne offers me is something I thought I would never have again. A home, a family, a future. I am more sure of this than I have been of anything in my entire life. The minister smiled. Then let us join you in matrimony. They were married in the little church with only Mrs. Kelly and a couple of townspeople as witnesses. Winifred wore her same traveling dress, cleaned and mended, and Xavier had purchased a new shirt for the occasion, though he still wore his buckskin trousers and moccasins. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that Mrs. Kelly wiped away tears. You bring that girl back to visit sometimes, she told Xavier sternly. She needs women friends, not just mountains and solitude. I promise, Xavier said, and Winifred knew he would keep his word. They bought supplies for the winter ahead, and Xavier insisted on purchasing fabric so Winifred could make herself new dresses. "You deserve pretty things," he said when she protested the expense. "Let me give them to you." They stayed one night at the boarding house, in a room together this time as husband and wife. Xavier was gentle with her, patient with her nervousness, and when it was over, Winifred lay in his arms feeling like she had found her way home at last. "I brought nothing to this marriage," she said softly, "just that worn Bible." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "And I told you that first day that is all we will ever need. Everything else we will build together." The ride back to the cabin took 2 days because they traveled slowly, stopping often to talk and laugh and steal kisses like the newlyweds they were. The mountains seemed to welcome them back, the aspens shimmering in the breeze, the creek singing its endless song. The cabin had never looked more like home. Xavier carried her over the threshold, a tradition he insisted on even though she laughed at the foolishness of it. That night, she moved her few possessions down from the loft into Xavier's room, their room now, and hung her grandmother's Bible on a peg beside the bed where they could both reach it. The seasons turned as they always did in the high country. September came with aspens turning gold, October with the first snows dusting the peaks. Xavier hunted and laid in meat for the winter while Winifred preserved vegetables and made the cabin snug against the cold ahead. They worked side by side, learning each other's rhythms, building the partnership that would sustain them through whatever came. In November, Winifred realized she was pregnant. She told Xavier on a morning when fresh snow blanketed the clearing and the world seemed hushed and holy. He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. When? Late spring, I think. June, maybe. We need to go to Denver, make sure you have everything you need. A good midwife, supplies, clothes for the baby. Xavier, we have time. The passes will be snowed in soon. We can go in the spring." But he was insistent, and 2 weeks later they made the journey to Denver before the winter snows closed the high country completely. Mrs. Kelly was delighted with the news and promised to come up to the cabin when the time came to help with the birth. "I delivered 6 of my own and helped with dozens more," she assured them. "Your baby will come into the world safe and sound, do not you worry." Winter settled over the mountains like a blanket, deep and quiet and cold. Some days the snow fell so thick they could not see the barn from the cabin. But inside they were warm and content, with plenty of food and firewood and each other. Xavier read to her in the evenings, books of poetry and philosophy from his father's collection. Winifred sewed tiny clothes from the fabric they had bought, each stitch a prayer for the child growing inside her. They made love by firelight and talked long into the night about names and hopes and what kind of parents they wanted to be. "I want our children to know beauty," Xavier said one night. "The way my mother's roses were beautiful. I want them to grow up understanding that there is more to life than just surviving." "They will know love," Winifred replied. "They will grow up safe and cherished with parents who choose each other every day. That is more than many children have. That is everything." The winter passed in a cocoon of snow and stillness. When spring finally came, melting the drifts and opening the trails, they emerged like butterflies from a chrysalis, changed and strengthened by the months of isolation. Winifred's belly was round and full now, the baby active beneath her hands. Xavier talked to it constantly, his big hands gentle on her stomach, telling their child about the world waiting outside. "There are eagles up here that soar so high they are just specks against the sky," he would say. "And in summer, the meadows are so full of flowers you cannot walk without crushing beauty beneath your feet. And your mother, she is the bravest, strongest woman I have ever known." In early June, When the world was green and new and full of promise, the pains began. Xavier rode down to Denver through the night, returning with Mrs. Kelly as the sun rose. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Xavier paced the cabin like a caged animal, terrified by the sounds coming from the bedroom. But when Mrs. Kelly finally emerged, she was smiling. "You have a son, a big healthy boy with a good strong cry, and your wife is fine, just tired." Xavier was in the room in 3 strides. Winifred lay pale and exhausted against the pillows, but her eyes were bright as she held their son. He was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved angrily at the world. "He is perfect," Xavier breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "You are perfect, both of you." They named him William, after Winifred's father, with the middle name of Alexander after Xavier's. William Alexander Thorne, born in a cabin in the Colorado mountains, welcomed into the world with more love than seemed possible to contain. Mrs. Kelly stayed for 2 weeks, helping Winifred recover and teaching both new parents the mysteries of caring for an infant. But eventually she had to return to Denver, leaving them alone with their son. Those first months were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. William was a demanding baby, always hungry, rarely sleeping for more than 2 hours at a stretch. But watching Xavier with his son, seeing his scarred hands cradling that tiny body with such infinite gentleness, Winifred fell in love with her husband all over again. "I never thought I would have this," Xavier told her one night as they watched William sleep. "A family, a home that is more than just shelter. I thought I had left all that behind in the war." "We have both been given a second chance," Winifred said. "A chance to build something new from the ashes of what we lost. And we will build something good, I promise you that." The years unfolded like the petals of a flower. William grew from infant to toddler to a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and hunt and read the mountains the way other children read books. 2 years after William's birth, Winifred gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, who had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes. The cabin was expanded as the family grew, with a proper second bedroom built on and a larger kitchen. Xavier proved to be a skilled carpenter, and the homestead prospered under his care. They had chickens now, and a milk cow, and a garden where Winifred grew vegetables and flowers both, unable to resist planting some beauty among the practical things. Each month, weather permitting, they made the trip to Denver for supplies and to maintain connections with the world beyond their mountains. William and Grace loved these trips, the chance to see other children and hear stories of the wider world. But they always seemed relieved to return to the cabin, to the peace and beauty of the high country. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xavier built Winifred a bookshelf for the small library they were collecting. She had started teaching the children their letters from her grandmother's Bible, but Xavier insisted they needed more books, more windows into the wider world of ideas and stories. "You were meant to be a teacher," he told her as she arranged the books with obvious pleasure. "Just because you teach our children instead of a classroom full does not make it any less important." "I never imagined this would be my life," she admitted. "When I stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but my Bible, I thought I had reached the end of everything. I thought I was starting over from nothing. And what do you think now?" She looked around the cabin, at the children playing by the fireplace, at the life they had built from hope and hard work and love. "I think I was not starting over. I think I was starting forward. All the pain that came before it led me here, to you, to this." Xavier pulled her into his arms, kissing her with the easy familiarity of long partnership. "I was wrong, you know. That first day when I said your Bible was all we would ever need. Oh, we needed more than that. We needed each other. We needed faith, yes, but also courage and stubbornness and willingness to build something new. We needed love. The Bible has that too, Winifred pointed out. My grandmother's notes are full of love, but you are right. What we have built here, it is more than I could have imagined. William came running up then, dragging Grace by the hand. Papa, tell us about the war. Tell us about the battles you were in. Xavier's face went still for a moment, the way it always did when the children asked about those years. No, buddy, those are not good stories. But you were a hero. I was a soldier who survived. That is all. Let me tell you instead about my mother's roses. Did I ever tell you about how my father would give her one perfect rose every day? The children settled down to listen, and Xavier wove the story with the skill of long practice. Winifred watched him, this man who had been broken by war and put himself back together in these mountains, who had found the courage to love again, to build a family, to create beauty from grief. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Winifred had brought her Bible out, the leather even more worn now from years of reading, her grandmother's notes augmented by her own observations and prayers. I should add something, she mused. Some wisdom for William and Grace when they are grown, something to guide them. What would you write? She thought about it, about the journey that had brought her here, about the lessons learned in grief and survival and love. I think I would write that faith is not just believing in God, but believing in the possibility of joy after sorrow. That is what you taught me, Xavier. That is what this life has taught me. Write it then. Add your wisdom to your grandmother's. Let this Bible be a record of the strong women in our family, passing down hope from generation to generation. She did write it, that very night, in the careful hand she had learned as a girl. And over the years, she added more, small observations about raising children and keeping faith and finding beauty in the everyday moments that made up a life. 10 years after their wedding, they made a special trip to Denver to have a photographer capture their family. It was a new technology that had come west with the railroad, and Xavier insisted they needed this record of who they were, this moment in time. The photograph showed Xavier with silver threading through his dark hair now, still powerful and straight but gentler somehow, softened by fatherhood. Winifred sat beside him, her auburn hair pulled back in a simple style, her face showing the character that came from hard-won happiness. William stood tall at 12 years old, already showing signs of his father's build and strength. Grace at 10 had her mother's smile and a mischievous glint in her gray eyes. And between them, held in Winifred's arms, was 2-year-old Thomas, named for the brother she had lost in the fire. They hung the photograph in the cabin above the fireplace, and Winifred would often stop to look at it, marveling at this family that had grown from ashes and faith, and a worn Bible that had survived when everything else was lost. The children grew as children do, faster than seemed possible. William proved to have his father's love of the mountains and his mother's quick mind. He talked of becoming a veterinarian, of learning to care for animals the way his father had taught him. Grace was more bookish, always reading, always asking questions. She reminded Winifred of herself at that age, hungry for knowledge and understanding. Young Thomas was still too small to show his true character, but he was a happy child, laughing easily, beloved by his older siblings who doted on him. "We have been blessed," Winifred said one evening as they watched the 3 children play in the clearing before the cabin. "More blessed than I ever dared to hope." "We made our own blessings," Xavier replied. "We chose hope when despair would have been easier. We chose each other when being alone was safer. We chose to build something good. I would choose you again. Every time in every life I would choose you." He kissed her then, still passionate after more than a decade of marriage, still hungry for her in the way that made her feel cherished and desired. They had learned each other so thoroughly over the years, every scar and imperfection, every strength and weakness. And the knowing had only deepened the love between them. That winter was particularly harsh, with snows that blocked the trails for weeks at a time. But the family was snug in their cabin with plenty of provisions and each other. Xavier taught William to carve, and beautiful figures began to emerge from blocks of wood under his patient guidance. Winifred taught Grace to sew, and together they made a quilt patterned after the one Xavier's mother had made, a gift for Grace's future. Thomas learned his letters that winter, tracing them in flour on the kitchen table while Winifred baked bread. At 3 years old, he was already showing signs of being the scholar of the family, memorizing poems and stories after only a single hearing. "He will go to university someday," Xavier predicted. "He has that kind of mind." "They all will if they want to," Winifred said firmly. "We will make sure of it. They will have choices, all the choices we did not have." "Better choices," Xavier agreed. "But I hope they choose to come back to these mountains. I hope this place gets into their blood the way it is in mine." As spring came and the snow melted, revealing the world beneath, tragedy struck the region. Scarlet fever swept through Denver and the mining camps, taking dozens of children. Xavier rode down to check on Mrs. Kelly and returned with grim news. "She lost her youngest grandson," he reported. "The fever came so fast, the doctor could do nothing. Mrs. Kelly is heartbroken. We should go to her. She was there for me when William was born. I want to be there for her now." They made the trip as a family, bringing food and what comfort they could offer. Mrs. Kelly was grateful for their presence, and William, Grace, and Thomas brought some light back into her eyes with their energy and affection. "You have built something beautiful, Mrs. Kelly told them as they prepared to leave. "In this hard country, you have built a family full of love. Do not take it for granted. Every day is a gift." They rode home sobered by her grief, holding their children a little closer, grateful for the health and happiness they had been given. That night, Winifred added another note in her grandmother's Bible. "Count your blessings daily. They can be taken from us in a moment." The years continued their steady march. William turned 16 and went to Denver to apprentice with the veterinarian there, coming home every few months with new knowledge and stories of the wider world. Grace turned 14 and began helping her mother teach the local children who lived in the scattered homesteads around their mountain. Thomas at 9 showed his quiet wisdom, often meditating on ideas far beyond his years. Xavier was in his early 50s now, his hair more silver than black, but he was still strong and capable. The mountains had been kind to him, keeping him fit and sharp. He and Winifred had settled into the comfortable partnership of long marriage, able to communicate with a glance, finishing each other's sentences, moving through their days with the ease of two people who knew each other completely. One evening, sitting on their porch watching the sun set over the peaks they had watched for nearly 20 years, Xavier said, "Do you have any regrets? If you could go back to that day you stepped off the stagecoach, would you change anything?" Winifred thought about the question seriously, looking back over the years. "If I could go back, I would not change getting on that stagecoach. I would not change accepting your offer. But I would go back further to the night of the fire. I would stay home that night instead of going to that party. I would save them. And then you would never have come west. You would never have come to me. I know. That is why I said I would not change getting on the stagecoach. The fire happened. I cannot change it, no matter how much I might wish I could. But I can be grateful for what came after, for you, for our children, for this life we have built." Xavier took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses that years of mountain life had put there. "You came here with nothing but a worn Bible, and you gave me everything, a home, a family, a reason to believe in more than just survival. You did the same for me. I was so lost, Xavier, so broken. You showed me how to be whole again. We healed each other," he said simply. That is what love does. William came home for good when he turned 22, setting up practice as a veterinarian in Denver but visiting the homestead often. He brought with him a young woman named Sarah, a teacher he had met in town, and the love between them was obvious and sweet. "She reminds me of you," Winifred told Xavier. "Educated, gentle, but with a core of steel, she will be good for William." They married the following spring in the same little church where Winifred and Xavier had spoken their vows. And the circle continued, the next generation beginning their own journey of building a life together. Grace surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to go east to college, to study literature, and come back to teach at a real school in Denver. "I love these mountains," she told her parents. "But I want to see the world beyond them too. I want to learn and grow and then bring that knowledge back home." Xavier struggled with the idea of his daughter going so far away, but Winifred understood. "Let her go," she counseled. "Let her have her adventures. She will come back to us. These mountains are in her blood." Grace left for Philadelphia, for the same city Winifred had fled all those years ago. But she went with excitement and hope rather than grief and desperation. She went knowing she had a home to return to, a family who loved her, roots deep and strong in the Colorado soil. Thomas stayed on the homestead, showing no desire to leave. He helped his father expand the operation, breeding horses that were in demand throughout the territory. He was quiet and steady, content with the mountain life in a way that reminded Winifred of Xavier when she first met him. "He is like you," she told her husband, "belonging to this place in his bones. He is like both of us. He has your wisdom and my love of solitude. He will do well here." On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children arranged a party, bringing family and friends up from Denver to celebrate. Mrs. Kelly came, now elderly but still sharp and present. William and Sarah brought their 2 children, giving Winifred and Xavier their first grandchildren. Grace came home from Philadelphia with stories of her studies and a young professor who was clearly smitten with her. They gathered in the clearing before the cabin on a perfect summer evening, with tables laden with food and laughter echoing off the mountain walls. As the sun set, Xavier stood and raised his glass. 25 years ago, I was in Denver for supplies when I saw a young woman step off a stagecoach with nothing but a worn Bible. I did not know then that my whole life was about to change. I did not know that this woman would give me everything I thought I had lost in the war: a home, a family, a future worth living for. He looked at Winifred with eyes that still held the same love and wonder they had held on their wedding day. "You came to me with nothing, and yet you brought everything that matters. Faith, hope, love, the courage to start over, the strength to build something new. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Winifred Thorne. And I would live these 25 years again exactly as they were, just to end up here with you, in these mountains we both love." There was not a dry eye among the gathered friends and family. Winifred stood and joined her husband, taking his hand in hers. "You told me once that my worn Bible was all we would ever need. You were right and wrong. We needed faith, yes, but we also needed each other. We needed the courage to trust when trust seemed foolish. We needed the strength to love when loss had taught us how much love could hurt. We needed these mountains and this life we have carved from wilderness." She pulled out her grandmother's Bible, even more worn now from decades of use. "This book has 3 generations of wisdom in it now. My grandmother's notes about surviving hard times. My notes about raising a family and finding joy in the everyday. And someday, when Grace has children or William's children grow up, they will add their notes too. This Bible will be a record of survival and faith and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. The party went on late into the night, but eventually people began to disperse. William and Sarah took their children to the barn that had been converted into a guest house. Grace bedded down in her childhood loft. Thomas and Mrs. Kelly settled in the new addition. And Winifred and Xavier retreated to their own room, the room they had shared for 25 years. "It has been a good life," Xavier said as they prepared for bed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "It is not over yet," Winifred replied, smiling at him. "We have years left, God willing. Grandchildren to spoil, adventures still to come. As long as I have you, I am content. That is all I need." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, bodies that knew each other completely, hearts that beat in unison. And afterward, lying in the darkness with Winifred's head on his chest, Xavier felt gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. The years continued their march, bringing changes as years always do. William's veterinary practice thrived, and he became known throughout Colorado for his skill with horses. Grace married her professor and moved to Denver, teaching at the new women's college that had opened there. She had 3 children who spent their summers at their grandparents' cabin, learning to love the mountains as their mother did. Thomas surprised everyone by falling in love with a widow from Denver, a woman named Catherine who had a young daughter. He brought them to the cabin, and within a month they were married, expanding the family once again. Winifred and Xavier grew older, but they grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Xavier's hair went completely white, and he moved a bit slower on cold mornings, but his gray eyes still lit up when Winifred entered a room. Winifred's auburn hair faded to a soft silver, and her hands grew gnarled with age, but she was still beautiful to Xavier, still the woman who had come to him with nothing but faith and courage. On their 40th wedding anniversary, they sat on their porch in the evening as they had done thousands of times before. The cabin behind them was full of family, grandchildren running everywhere, their children and children's spouses laughing and talking. But for this moment, Winifred and Xavier were alone with the mountains and each other. 40 years, Xavier said wonderingly. "It feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. Do you remember what you told me that first day, when I said I had nothing but my Bible? I said that was all we would ever need. You were right, not because of the Bible itself, though that has been important, but because you saw that I had faith, that I had not given up, even when I had lost everything. You saw my strength when I could not see it myself. You gave me back my humanity," Xavier said. "I had lived alone for so long, I had forgotten how to be part of something bigger than myself. You reminded me what it means to love, to build, to hope for the future." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Grandchildren's laughter drifted from inside the cabin. The creek sang its endless song. An eagle circled overhead, riding the thermals up toward the peaks. "If I died tomorrow," Winifred said softly, "I would die grateful for you, for our children, for this life we have lived in these beautiful mountains. Do not talk of dying, we have years left. Maybe, maybe not. But either way, I want you to know, you saved me, Xavier Thorne. And I like to think I saved you too." "You did," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We saved each other." That night, Winifred added what she thought might be her final entry in her grandmother's Bible. Her handwriting was shakier now, but the words were clear. "Faith is not just about believing in God. It is about believing in love, in hope, in the possibility of redemption and new beginnings. I came west with nothing, and I found everything. To whoever reads this in the years to come, know that the darkest night will end. Know that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Know that courage is not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. Build your life on faith and love, and you will never be poor. 5 more years passed, bringing more grandchildren, more changes. William became a grandfather himself, his oldest daughter having a baby girl. Grace's children grew into young adults making their own way in the world. Thomas and Catherine's blended family thrived on the homestead, with Thomas proving to be as capable as his father had been. Xavier was 70 now, and the years were catching up with him. He could no longer ride as far or work as hard, but he was content to sit on his porch and watch the mountains, to play with his grandchildren, to hold Winifred's hand and remember all the years behind them. Winifred herself was 67, still sharp-minded but slowing down. She spent her days teaching the younger grandchildren, writing in her journals, and reading in the library they had built together over the decades. One autumn morning, as the aspens blazed gold against the dark pines, Xavier woke feeling strange. There was no pain, just a sense of something ending, something completing its circle. He looked at Winifred sleeping beside him and felt overwhelmed with love and gratitude. He woke her gently, and she knew immediately something was wrong. "Xavier, I love you," he said. "I need you to know that. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, the very best thing. I know, I have always known, and you are the best thing that happened to me." He smiled then, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his weathered face. "It has been a good life, has it not? Better than either of us had any right to expect. The best life." He took her hand, and they lay together as the morning light filled their room. His breathing grew shallow, then slower, and Winifred held him as his spirit left as gently as the turning of a page. The grief was enormous, but it was clean grief, uncomplicated by regret or words left unsaid. They had loved each other well for 45 years. They had built a good life, raised good children, left the world better than they found it. The funeral was held on the mountain, in the clearing before the cabin. All their children and grandchildren came, along with friends from Denver and the scattered homesteads. They buried Xavier on a hill overlooking the valley, with the mountains rising all around and the aspens shimmering gold in the autumn sun. Winifred stayed on in the cabin with Thomas and Catherine. She could not imagine leaving this place where she and Xavier had built their life together. Every corner held memories. Every view was something they had shared. She lived 3 more years, years of quiet contentment surrounded by family. She taught her great-grandchildren their letters from the worn Bible, adding small notes in the margins for them to discover someday. She told stories about Xavier to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive and vital. On a spring morning, with wildflowers blooming in the meadow and the creek running high with snowmelt, Winifred died peacefully in her sleep. She was 70 years old, and she died as she had lived, with grace and faith and love. They buried her next to Xavier on the hill, and the whole family gathered once more to say goodbye. Grace read from the worn Bible, the passages that had sustained 3 generations of strong women. William spoke of his parents' love and the example they had set. Thomas simply stood with tears running down his weathered face, unable to find words for the loss. But it was young Thomas's daughter, a girl of 14 also named Winifred after her grandmother, who spoke the final words. She held the worn Bible carefully, reverently. "Great-grandmother told me that she arrived here with nothing but this Bible, that her husband said it was all they would ever need, and she said they were right and wrong. They needed faith, but they also needed each other. They needed love and courage and hope. They built a life on those things, and that life is their legacy to us. She opened the Bible to the page where her great-grandmother had written her final words. She wrote, "Faith is not just about believing in God. It is about believing in love, in hope, in the possibility of redemption and new beginnings. That is what they gave us. That is what we must pass on." The family dispersed slowly, but the story did not end there. The cabin on the mountain remained in the Thorne family, passed from generation to generation. The worn Bible went with it, accumulating more notes, more wisdom, more evidence of lives well lived. William's great-grandson became a doctor, serving the mountain communities with the same dedication his ancestor had shown. Grace's granddaughter became a writer, chronicling the history of the early settlers and the love stories that bloomed in the harsh wilderness. Thomas's descendants stayed on the homestead, breeding horses and living the mountain life their great-grandparents had carved from the wilderness. And always, when a young member of the family felt lost or discouraged, someone would bring out the worn Bible. They would read the notes in the margins, wisdom from Winifred and her grandmother, observations about survival and faith and the power of love. They would look at the photograph above the fireplace of Xavier and Winifred and their 3 children, frozen in a moment of happiness from long ago. The story of how Winifred Adams arrived in Denver with nothing but a worn Bible, and how Xavier Thorne said that was all they would ever need, became family legend. It was told at weddings and christenings, during hard times when hope was needed, whenever anyone needed reminding that love can heal and faith can sustain, and new beginnings are always possible. The mountains stood eternal, witness to the love story that had played out beneath their peaks. The cabin aged gracefully, expanding and modernizing but retaining its essential character. The creek sang the same song it had sung when Xavier and Winifred first heard it together. And in the hearts of their descendants, the love story lived on, passed down like the worn Bible itself, from generation to generation. A reminder that sometimes losing everything is the beginning of finding what matters most. That sometimes arriving with nothing means you are ready to receive everything. That faith and love and hope, combined with courage and hard work, can build something that lasts far beyond a single lifetime. Xavier and Winifred Thorne had arrived in each other's lives when both were broken and lost. They had healed each other, built a life together in the beautiful mountains of Colorado, and left a legacy of love that would echo through the generations. Their story proved that the darkest times can lead to the brightest futures, that love found in the wilderness can be the strongest love of all, and that sometimes the most valuable thing you can bring to a new life is not material possessions, but faith in the possibility of hope and redemption. The worn Bible that had survived fire and loss, that had guided 3 generations of strong women through hardship and joy, remained on its peg beside the bed in the cabin. Visitors would sometimes take it down carefully, reverently, and read the notes in the margins. And they would understand that this was more than just a book. It was a record of survival, of faith maintained through terrible loss, of love that transformed lives and built futures. That was all they had ever needed, faith and love in each other. Everything else had grown from those simple seeds, planted in the hard mountain soil and nurtured through decades of partnership and devotion. It was a simple truth, profound in its simplicity, and it had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything.